Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible, babbling about psychology and theology. So I've been doing a video series breaking down a webinar I did earlier this year with Strong Support. It's an organization for Muslims internationally who deal with unwanted same-sex attraction, or they would say unwanted same-sex lust. And so I did a webinar talking about the types of therapy options available out there. And so I did 2 videos on that, and now we're on to the Q&A portion. So I'm going to do 2 videos about the Q&A, and this video is the Q&A portion from the actual webinar. Now, the Q&A is actually the reason why I waited so long to post this webinar on my channel, because even though the actual webinar was live streamed on Facebook, it was public, anyone could watch it, I didn't feel comfortable posting the Q&A portion for a while because some of the guys gave their full names and they shared very personal details about their lives and about their therapy experiences, and I wanted to respect their privacy and confidentiality. Even though it was already out there, I didn't feel comfortable posting it. So I tried to do what I can with this to edit out any full names and to block out their names when they ask their questions on the Zoom call. You don't see their faces, you just see their names, so I blocked that out. There's one caller in particular who was sharing about his experience in counseling. He had been doing counseling for 7 months with an actual reintegrative therapist, and he was very dissatisfied with the degree of progress he was seeing. First, he started saying he was very effective, but then he was showing some dissatisfaction with the level of change he was seeing in his attractions. And so there's a lot more I could say about that particular caller. I hesitate to, though, because I actually did speak with him one-on-one later on. We had our own Zoom call together. And so I know the therapist that he is seeing, he can do much worse than that therapist. He's seen a very excellent therapist that I know personally. And so in discussing things with him more, we were able to identify a little bit more about what was blocking his progress and also the therapeutic relationship. So I don't want to leave anyone with an impression that that he stumped me. There's a lot more to it. I could have pushed back a bit about some of the things he was saying, in which he was saying that no one actually really changes, they just sort of fluctuate. I could have pushed back on that, but I really wanted to be sensitive to where he was coming from and just attend to his emotions and his frustrations there. So, at risk of looking like I'm damaging the field by including his complaint, I'm going to actually post that particular question in this, or keep it in this video, because I think there's some things in my response that could be helpful. And I want to normalize as well that you may not experience the degree of change that you hope for when you look out for this counseling. What do you do in that situation? Now also, he was only 7 months in. He had experienced some degree of benefit, but he also acknowledged that there was a lot he had to work through related to trauma in his adolescence. So, hey, every person's unique. You're not going to experience some dramatic shifts in just a few months. 7 months may seem like a long time, but depending on the amount of stuff you're working through, it can take a while. So don't use that as a gotcha, see, there's proof that this is all bunk. But just, yeah, there's unique situations. Every client is different. So anyway, that said, here's the Q&A.
Well, I do see one question here. So is aversion therapy still being applied now, and is it really effective? No. So, well, first off, all right, let's talk about the effectiveness. Okay, in the 2009 APA Task Force report, they looked at the studies. There were very few studies on the old forms of therapy, which used aversive techniques. And they were not very rigorous, these studies. They reported some change, but there wasn't very much follow through. So we don't know how long lasting any changes were or benefits were. They found some negative outcomes, such as increased suicidal ideation or depression, isolation from family. But the studies weren't very rigorous. So there wasn't a whole lot for them to go off of. Now, our clinical instincts would say it's not wise to use aversive techniques, but there was still some success, and that was reported through these approaches. So I understood why they might have used them in the past, and they were used as part of a repertoire. Like, it wasn't the only approach that these behavioral therapists would use. So just to say that there isn't enough evidence to show how harmful it was, but I would say that pretty much at this point, especially with as the psychoanalysts, they never used aversive techniques. And as psychoanalysis grew into Nicolosi's approach, very psychodynamic and trauma-centered, and actually focused on relieving people of shame. So the very last thing we're ever going to do was try to harm a client. So that became the most predominant therapeutic approach for years. So, like, I can't think of a single therapist of the past 30 years who uses any sort of aversive techniques. Now, is it possible there's maybe some pastoral counselor out there using something like aversive techniques? Like, I don't know, maybe. But when you hear these horror stories, but a lot of these so-called conversion therapy survivors will say that they were strapped to a bed and they had cables tied to them and to their genitals and they're electroshocked. Like, who has that equipment? And like, no, and they can't remember who did it. They can't remember the name of this therapist who did this for years. And then they'll say it was a therapist, then they'll change it to as a pastor. It's like, it gets more and more someone who's not even an actual therapist that, well, I don't know of any single professional therapist who would do this sort of therapy, let alone approve of it. So no, it just, not to mention, it just goes against what is indicated by the therapeutic model or explanation for the etiology, the cause of the attractions. So if we understand that it's more rooted in unmet developmental needs and trauma, why would you use behavioral approach then? You don't heal from early childhood wounds through being inflicted with pain. So no, it's not being used. It hasn't, as far as professional therapists, haven't been using this approach since the 70s. And I don't know of anyone that's in the Alliance or the Christian ministries, like those in Restored Hope Network, that advocate for it or would tolerate it. If we ever heard of a therapist doing this, we would say, report this person to your licensing board. Like, make a criminal charge, because there's already rules against torture. So these therapy bans trying to say that people are being tortured, they're based off a straw man. So anyway, so that's one question.
So the person who's asked that, is that answered your question, brother? I think it's Brother Gober. I think if he's still on. If not, just let us know. But yeah, thanks for answering that, Andy. We've got another question. Brother Abdullah, would you like to ask your question?
Thanks, Andrew, for your enlightening speech and enlightening talk on the therapeutic approaches that are available today. Sometimes I think, okay, what's going to happen in 5 years when there's another form of therapy that happens, because I've been in integrative therapy now for a while, and it's been incredibly healing and effective. However, one thing I've noticed is that I cannot remember many traumatic. So when we're dealing with these feeling states such as shame and whatnot, I cannot remember traumatic events when I was young. And we know the gender identity phase at the age of 1 to 3, and that's when most traumatic events would have occurred. But I have so much trauma in adolescence that the vast majority of trauma that we've dealt with in therapy have been in adolescence. And it's been helpful, but I'll be honest with you, after so long being in therapy, my SSA hasn't decreased. It's still the same, and it's incredibly disappointing, and I feel very dismayed. So I was told by some individuals, after doing a lot of research and reading the books of Socrates and whatnot, that an individual cannot do reparative therapy if he does not go through psychoanalysis, because he needs to unrepress those repressed wounds as children. So how are you supposed to deal with something which you cannot remember, because the most painful memories supposedly are at such a young age, because that's when the parents' relationship happened with the child. So what do you think of this? Because I mean, there is a lot of people saying that out there that psychoanalysis is the only approach, and we should really revive some type of combination between the both, so the individual can remember or unrepress those wounds, because there's so many people who are doing reparative therapy and they're not coming out with results, even though the third is being said. Sorry for the long question. It doesn't seem to be the case, because I know so many people that have gone through integrative therapy, but the SSA ultimately at the end really hasn't been on a continuum. It hasn't changed, like it hasn't been static. It's been on a continuum, like you said. It comes and goes. So what do you think?
Thank you.
That is a good question, because like I said, psychoanalysis has fallen out of favor so much it's hard to find any actually trained psychoanalysts. There's a couple points you made there about trying to access the repressed memories. I would be cautious about any therapeutic approach that would tell you that they can help you access repressed memories. What typically we find is that people who have blocked memories, even though this probably isn't very encouraging, they'll remember those memories, those repressed memories, kind of spontaneously. Just because there's controversy or debate about implanted memories, or a therapist influencing someone remembering things a certain way. So like if you were trying to do, say, hypnotism or something where you would uncover repressed memories, is there a degree that the therapist was influencing you or being suggestive? So most therapists, to avoid being blamed for that, would usually refrain from anything to explicitly try to recall repressed memories. But when we do have people who have recovered memories, it's usually because as they're sort of making other changes in their life, the memories just sort of come on their own as they encounter other triggers. And then we can work on those. So when I've had clients who have like gaps in their memory or blocks in their memory, I don't want to speculate too much. Well, what could those memory blocks include? Mostly I'm just like, let's work with the ones we have. I've been working on this for 7 months. I'm not sure. I know we'd have to talk more and more. And I think we can do that for sure. And I would definitely be discussing that more with your therapist. And I would probably want to examine or have a frank conversation with your therapist about the Therapeutic Alliance to make sure you guys are connecting well in a certain way. But like I said, yeah, there's a chance some people may not experience a change that they were hoping for, the change in the desires or the attractions. And so I think the larger question is, will that affect your own value system? Will that then mean that because of the inability to meet the goals that you had, whether or not that was an expressed goal of the therapy, but you were hoping either way to have experienced a reduction in those attractions or that lust, and in maybe the increase or the genesis of opposite sex attractions, and that just didn't occur. What do you do with that? Does that then mean, well, then I'm going to embrace a homosexual identity and relationships? Or you're going to be like, no, whether or not this changes, I'm still going to continue. So you want to be, then some of the therapy will be about, all right, creating a support system that's going to help you with either choice you decide to make. So I hope the therapist is not trying to give you any false hope about the level of change you may experience, or discouraging you from any particular route. It's up to you which way you go with that. But yeah, I would discuss that more and more with your therapist. Like, what may be happening? What else may be holding me back? There's no quick trick. There's no shortcut, I think, to accessing those any repressed memories. I would caution against making that like the holy grail of the therapy process. So, but I hurt for you hearing that, because that's not easy to hear that you've been at this for 7 months and the therapist is apparently using reintegrated therapy. They're using the latest version of Nicholosi's approach, and you're still not seeing any progress. I would just be sort of taking a pause and talking to your therapist and be like, okay, what's happening? We really need to discuss this more in depth. Is there other approaches I need to take? And maybe, even if you are seeing a therapist multiple times a week, if there's a deeper work you can do and that option's available somewhere, then maybe pursue it. Yeah, I'm sorry. I can empathize with you, but I don't have a firm answer. I'm still learning this stuff myself. And actually just started a consultation group with Joe Nicolosi Jr. so I can get trained in reintegrative therapy. But yeah, so I'm still learning this stuff myself. So I don't want to give you too much of like assurance one way or the other, or instruction. But I would definitely continue talking with your therapist about that, about your frustrations with your progress or the changes you would like to see more of. So.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's so important to have that therapeutic alliance where you find that you are getting progress through, and this kind of promise of a change that, it's going to go away, even if I'm having the most advanced type of therapy, I don't think anyone can promise a change. I think for therapy only can bring about more self-awareness of what's there, but definitely if it's Nicolosi says 3 months, isn't it? If it's 3 months, if you're not seeing progress, then consider changing things and seeing what helps. So hopefully that answers Brother Abdullah's question. We had, I think, Sister Annie.
I'm sorry, I'll just add one thing. Just make sure you have a good support system with you. It makes it so difficult when you don't have other people who are supporting you in your goals and your values. So it's like, okay, I'm going to do this therapy, and then once I experience the change, then I'll be more genuine about who I am, what I'm experiencing, what my struggles are. But I would hope that you would have people that are already in your corner who know what you're going to counseling for and supporting you, and they're letting you know that, hey, whether or not you experience any changes, we're going to love you, we're going to support you. So make sure you have a support system in place, people who really care about just your being healthy and in general, but also that are going to support your values. Whether it's, if you're like, well, whether or not my attractions change, I'm still going to abide by this particular sexual ethic. If that's your sincerely held value, then you want people that are in your corner and also know your struggle, but still accept you. So sometimes we think that, well, I'll just keep that part of myself a secret. And I'm not saying this is your case because I don't know. I'll just keep that private and just discuss that with my therapist. And everyone else in my life, I will try to keep up the front that everything's good, I'm fine. And we just try to deal with all the problems in therapy. But I would say things are most effective when you have a whole support system, and therapy is just part of that support system. So just an extra word of encouragement there.
Right. Okay. Now, thank you. So if we go to the Q&A, if there's any more, actually no, we've got one. We've got
a verbal one.
Brother Faris. Thank you, Brother Abdullah. Brother Faris.
Thank you for your seminar. I have many questions actually. First, I will,
one.
yes, the latest. I will ask about two major things. Because lately I saw like a comorbidity between SSA and CPTSD, like the complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
And I don't know this because also it's related to narcissism and narcissistic parents, actually mother or father. And sometimes I feel the symptoms are very, very identical with SSA. Like they are, to some extent, they are based on shame, fear, and other issues like, I feel like there are some similarities between both of them. And I don't know what are, because even this subject is still new, like CPTSD is still new subject to the psychotherapy. Yeah. And it's still on progressing, let us say. But I see there are many identical issues between both of them. This is first. Second, what about the holistic therapy? Like I know David Matheson before tried to make approach about holistic therapy, but unfortunately he get out. But I mean, it was like, what's the nutrition, for example, role? What is other therapies, for example, brain spotting, IMTT now is good. But I mean, how if these therapies combine together to cover all the dimensions or the factors of SSA?
When you say holistic therapy, what are you including or meaning by that?
I mean, like, it's not only, it's on the body, the mind, because some people get depressed because their gut they have physical issues, like their gut is not good, or they have prostate inflammation, or something like the body react. Also, it's like a vicious circle between the body and the soul and the spirit. And that's why, like, it might be also some issues that are combined with other issues. So we need a holistic approach that all the special people from many specializations, they can see the issue, what's the whole issue about.
Yeah. And also for anyone else watching or listening in who doesn't understand that one acronym you use, CPTSD, that is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And so it's not, at least in America, it's not an official diagnosis, but for those of us in the trauma-related field, we recognize that as a different form of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, because we often view PTSD as a reaction to like a one-time event, like it survived or maybe not a one-time event, but a very prolonged event that was dangerous or life-threatening, and say like you were in the military and you experienced warfare. And so then you have PTSD and you're hypervigilant from that. Complex PTSD is referring to the reactions to complex trauma, which is more about prolonged, especially in childhood, prolonged, repeated abuse, neglect. And so we see the effects of that in things like depression, sexual promiscuity, anxiety, hypertension, and yes, when you have, like, there's a study done by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, called the ACE study, or the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. And so they had a lot of family doctors, when clients would come in with complaints about their physical complaints, have them also do a quick survey about their childhood. And they'd find that there's an overwhelming amount of people with medical issues who have adverse childhood experiences as well. So we see that the effects of complex trauma on our bodies. So yeah, an integrative approach would be good. This is where it's helpful when we understand that, okay, so we're not necessarily treating the same-sex lust, the same-sex attraction, the homosexuality. We're not treating that. That's a fruit, that's a symptom. So I find it more helpful to think of that as a trauma reaction. So that's why it's helpful to come from a trauma-sensitive approach and be like, well, this person went through abuse, neglect. They had narcissistic parents, like clinically narcissistic. So, well, what's the approach we would use for that? Yeah, we would use a trauma-sensitive approach. And then as they have consequences with their health, physical health, we might have to use some medication at times to help with some of the trauma reactions or just the effects on their body. Mindfulness-based approaches, better health and nutrition. Inflammation, that's something we're learning a lot about now. It's still very young in the field, seeing how much inflammation affects our emotions, our depression. So that's still a very developing field. So I would say, yes, the best approach is going to be integrative and not just be focused on treating the attractions or the sexuality, but treating the whole person. Like our whole goal really should be for people to just be healthier in general. So I'm all about a truly holistic approach, which is encouraging my clients just to be healthy, period. Oftentimes when I get a client, they'll tell me what their problem is, but then I'll be like, okay, what's your vision for your life? And they don't know how to answer that question. So I'm like, okay, like not just what's your vision or what's your goals for therapy, but like what's your vision for your life? You know, physically, where do you want to be? And emotionally, relationally, occupationally. And I want to treat the whole person and help them grow and develop. And that's a lot of positive psychology going there as well. I'm not sure if that adequately answers the question, because there's still a lot that we're learning about the developments in inflammation and the physical effects of trauma. And so I'm all about us continuing studying that and integrating that into our therapeutic approaches. But we still have a lot more to learn. And so I'm growing in that area as myself.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Brother Forrest. So I just want to go on a quick poll, and we'll take more questions. So you should be able to see the poll now on your screen, as a lot of people are talking about that they have taken specialist therapy or counseling for unwanted same-sex attraction. Even if it doesn't apply, just put NA. So, but it'd be interesting. We've got a few people who have taken therapy. It'd just be interesting to see what we're asking is, have you taken therapy? And if so, has it brought about a sense of self-awareness? And if you have taken it, has it been faith-based, or has it been, someone who's secular based? So we're just almost through, I think, halfway through of people just filling that out. And I think it's just about 76% through. So it's just a poll. You'll see the poll on your screen. So it looks like, at least for the first question, it seems like there's a half-half split between people who have. So it's nice to see. We've got people joining in who've had experiences of therapy, and obviously people who haven't. And it seems like, apart from, for most people, it seems like it has brought about a sense of self-awareness, which I think is so important. And I think what Andrew was saying earlier about recognizing what works for you, what's actually happening. Am I getting a better sense of trauma? What happened to me? Is it, am I better getting an understanding of that? So in terms of question 3, it's interesting to see two people taking a faith-based therapist, and then the majority, or if they've not taken it, taking a secular. And obviously we're in the at least in the Muslim side of things, we're very new to this. So it's probably impossible to find a specifically trained Muslim therapist which will offer some of it, the reintegrative method or Cohen's method. We've got some Cohen's method. For example, in Egypt, there's 2 therapists, for example, who have trained with Richard Cohen's method. But for vast majority, at least the English-speaking Muslim majority, there isn't people who are. So we're very early on in our state, and you can see that by the poll. So thanks for people for voting that.
Now, this may be difficult, but there's a book I would highly recommend by, this is a mouthful, Gerard J.M. Vanden Aardweg. Okay, and the book is The Battle for Normality, A Guide for Self-Therapy for Homosexuality. So I did this together with one of my clients. He's mostly coming from a developmental perspective, similar to Nicolosi's, but he emphasizes more the peer relationships later in life, more so than the parental relationships. But so the first section of the book will be development of homosexuality. And then second part is like the last half. So the first half is more just explaining the causes. Last half is a lot of practical steps and tips. And so he would advise going through this stuff with like a mentor who can work with you, not just doing it by yourself. One technique I really liked from it, and it's been a while, it's been a couple of years since I read through this. So the main one that I took with me that I was just going over this with my client this morning is personifying the problem. Not necessarily the same-sex attraction, but what is the sort of the sub-personality that is emerging that when we're in that sub-personality will influence us to act out in some way. So it's usually a sub-personality that developed in response to unmet needs. So for my client, it was when he felt like he was ignored or he was being treated unfairly as a young boy. So it's like he has this angry little boy sub-personality that would emerge and demand things be done. And so out of that, he wants to do something that makes him feel good, and so he'll go to pornography. And so we call that the angry little boy that rises up and is making demands. No, this is unfair. I want this, I want that. And so he advises personifying the problem. And then another approach he has is using humor. So making fun of the problem, using like talk to the hurt little boy, talk to the angry little boy who is making demands and wants things his way and wants to resolve problems his own way and self-indulge and like mock the little boy. Like this is kind of funny because it's counterintuitive. We usually think, well, you want to do some self-compassion. That's what I typically want to do. But there are times where the angry little boy is being petulant and is demanding. So use some self-humor and not take yourself as serious. So that's an approach he would use. There's a few others in here, of course. But have accountability, have people that you care for that can actually listen to you, hear your story, walk through with you some of the emotional roots. If you have same-sex attraction, I would advise against your accountability partner being another guy that you who also has same-sex attraction, especially if he sort of fits that type that you're attracted to. So I'd advise against that. But you want, within an accountability system, you want peers as well as ones who are older. You want guys who can relate to your struggle personally as well as guys who can't. You know, guys who can welcome you into the world of men and just treat you like you're a regular guy and can just relate to you on a level as a human and as just a fellow man, not just another same-sex attraction struggler. So, but yeah, if you can get a hold of this book, get it. It's just
I think
one of the books banned. Well, it was banned by Amazon. Yeah. So this is
banned. I got it on Amazon last time. Maybe it is banned now. But
I'm not sure if it's still.
A very good
last
book.
I checked, it was one of the banned books.
Okay.
It's a shame, but you might be able to find it on the black market. Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you for that. If we go to Brother Errol.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. My question is this. One is very short and the other is longer, so if it's okay.
Okay, yeah.
Are there any atheists that practice that kind of therapy?
Any atheists? Okay, so that's the first question. And then the second question.
No, that's a good question.
Second question, the question, have you ever encountered people who experience change towards homosexuality in the middle of their life? Not like during childhood or anything, because to me it happened when I was 17.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up as straight-ish, and then I experienced some sort of a traumatic event, and it changed for me almost completely. So I wanted to know if you ever encountered those kinds of cases.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. Well, you're still. I'm not sure which one. Let me start with the first question, since that was one of the ones I saw in the chat as well. Do I know of any atheist therapists who support this therapy? I can't say that I do, and it's not to say that there aren't any out there, and because this is not necessarily a religious approach. This is just any liberal therapist or psychologist should have no problem with this type of therapy. Any scientifically based therapist should have no problem with it, because if you follow the science, there's nothing that says that this is harmful in and of itself. There may be some therapists who are harmful or unprofessional in their approaches, but to make this a goal of therapy, to explore your heterosexual potential or your sexual attraction fluidity to some extent, is not in and of itself harmful or impossible. So someone being guided by the science should still be open to that. But unfortunately, what we see is there's people follow along lines of politically and religiously, whether or not they'll support this type of work. What's really sad is when we see Christians and other religious people who are against this type of therapy because they've been pretty much duped by the propaganda that's against this therapy out there. But I would say there's no reason why an atheist or an entirely liberal therapist should be against this type of work or wouldn't be interested in doing it. And one thing I'm curious about, I did a video about this on my channel, is the potential for new motivations for guys to experience and pursue sexual attraction change. And what I've been seeing is in response to radical feminism, there's been like this men's movement. And so men are starting to join together in different ways and support each other and actually provide comfort to each other for their wounds they've experienced. And one of the predictions I had was maybe as that is happening, guys who are joining that community and that movement with unwanted same-sex attractions will begin to see, have some of their underlying needs met, and start to maybe experience some attraction change or expansion of their attractions and or at least their values, and want to have a traditional family at some point. So there was a video I did about that based off an interview with Benjamin Boyce, and this guy who's a men's rights activist who was living as a homosexual for years and then started to see his attractions change. He would say they expanded into heterosexuality. So not necessarily he had a reversal of his attractions. He probably still, I guess by today's standard, they would say he's bisexual. But he would just say, no, I've expanded into heterosexuality. So anyway, it's a long way to answer that quick question, but I don't see a reason why you can't, if you're open-minded and just follow the evidence and willing to work with people with their own goals. But I don't know of any, I might know some, I just don't know the faith of everyone I know in this field. There might be some out there. Okay, the other question, you might have to remind me again what that was.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. The second question, could you repeat that again?
The question is, have you ever seen a patient who came to you? I experienced the change towards homosexuality in the middle of life. I've always been a bisexual, but more of a straight, much more straight than gay. Now I'm almost exclusively gay, and some days, some rare days, I can feel really strong attraction towards women, but my sexuality had mostly changed for 7 years. Yeah, 7 years.
Okay.
That's
and you were saying that it was around age 17 that you really experienced this change, or at least more of the influence. And yes, of course, yeah. We would say, so even Nicolosi talked about this, even though his focus was primarily on those who the root issues went back to like age 3. He would call that the pre-Oedipal stage. So he sort of have a certain number of stages, but he was also aware of there being those who developed same-sex attractions later in adolescence. And that also is supported by the research. If you look up research by, say, Lisa Diamond, she's found there's a lot of sexual fluidity in teenagers and young adults in particular. There may be some among older adults, but mostly you see more of that fluidity as you're still developing. So like they've done research where they survey teenagers at like 1 grade, how you sexually identify, and then the same teenagers at a later grade, and their identification changed. And so it fluctuates, or it was in flux. Now, normally the trend was back toward heterosexuality, but either way, what it shows is there's, maybe for lack of a better word, vulnerability to a lot of influence and other changes. I mean, that's your identity formation stage when you're an adolescent. In 17, you're still an adolescent. Even early 20s, I don't like to say they're adolescent, but you're still developing. Your brain isn't even fully developed until mid-20s. So, and we've been delaying adolescence more and more, at least socially. So the expectation to arrive at an identity is being delayed more and more. So the factors that are going to be more peer-related, and at least my assumption would be more peer-related. That would be more of a contributing factor, as well as your environment, and even some ways we react and choices we make in response to experiences. That's always plays a role, but we don't like to say that. It's like, oh, so you're saying I chose my sexual attractions. No, just sometimes through our choices, it influences a certain direction. So say you started to engage in homosexual behavior as a teenager, what's happening at that age? You're getting a rush of hormones already as you're going through puberty, and you're also still figuring out your identity. You go and throw in some sort of sexual acts, period, that's going to influence you. So even if we're dealing with people with heterosexual attractions, I don't like to use the term, but heterosexual, homosexual as much, but even with attractions to the opposite sex, you start including sexual behavior at a young age, that has a big impact. So we actually find more healthy outcomes if you delay the one's sexual debut. There's a research that was done, and a really good book by Christopher Doyle that goes into the benefits of delaying sexual debut. You know, putting off experiencing or engaging in sexual behavior. So you got teenagers now that are engaging in pornography, in sexual acts with others, whether it's the same or opposite sex, that's going to influence things. And at the last Alliance conference, one of the presenters, Monica Bro, she was talking about how even through heterosexual pornography, that can end up influencing homosexual attraction, because if you're watching it, you're watching the male for cues of arousal. And so just like Pavlov's dog, you end up getting sort of conditioned to be aroused by the male's arousal as you're watching him engage with the female. So you're watching him and you're seeing him get aroused. And so you're pairing that with your own arousal. So what we engage in can influence us in certain ways. Our environment, the media, those all influence us on top of any trauma or major experience that you had at that age. So yeah, definitely. What I would say is more rare is that you are pretty solidified in your, say, just pure, more exclusively heterosexual attractions throughout life, and then in like your adulthood, like your 30s or 40s, something happening, and then your attractions radically changing. That I would say is not as likely to occur. But you're still in your teenage years, early 20s, you're still developing, so you're highly influenced at those ages.
I understand. So it's still valuable to explore it. Even when I'm now more of an adult, more of a young adult, I'm 25.
Mm-hmm. You're just now reaching that stage where what we would call now the emerging adulthood. You're like, it's guys, your prefrontal cortex doesn't finish developing until you're 25-ish. So that's several years just prior to now where you are still very highly influenced by your environment, by experiences, by things you view, whether it's pornography, if you engaged in any sexual acts with someone, those were highly influential. So what you continue to feed will influence you down the road. So, and also, but not just that, it's also about the level of shame you have with those experiences. Because I worked with plenty of guys who had an experience like a same-sex encounter when they're, say, junior high, and it was not enjoyable to them, or it was even something that they're ashamed of, but they had already enough confidence and security in their gender that they were able to work through that. It might have had some other consequences, but it didn't necessarily develop into same-sex attraction. Whereas other guys, maybe because of some other underlying issues, are sort of primed for that to have the effect it had. There's a video I did on my YouTube channel I would say to watch for a little more insight on this, and that's I did a video on Aaron Hernandez and homosexuality. Aaron Hernandez was a football player who killed himself, but he committed murder. And when he was in prison, some of his homosexual behaviors from his past got revealed. And so they did a documentary about him on Netflix, and I did a commentary video about that. So
and there's more videos of Andrew's on PsychoBible which we at the start of the webinar we showed, and I encourage you to do watch that. Thank you so much, brother Errol, for your questions. So I guess I want to ask Andrew, do you want to take one more question, or
yeah, you know what, we'll take this one here. I know, I'm sorry guys, my answers are long, and so I apologize about that. But if these remaining questions could be forwarded to me, I can always
we can always forward these to you. Yeah, that's fine.
But the last question is a pretty good one, and that is there's an anonymous person here. Is it worth obtaining a profile of some kind of prospective therapists? Are there therapists available in the UK for SSA related matters, or is it mainly the US? So I would check with a couple sources. I can't give you like names of everyone out there, but there's a couple options I would look into. Check with the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice. The website is therapeuticchoice.com, and they have a directory for approved therapists. It's not so much we don't have a certification program, but they do have preferred therapists and psychologists who work in this field that they would recommend. If you don't see someone in your region, if you're in the US that is accessible, some of them may do online counseling, and maybe contact the Alliance for more options. If you're outside the US, I would check with the IFTCC, the International Federation for Therapeutic and Counseling Choice. It's a new organization, but they're developing and they're trying to get a directory of therapists who do this work. Now, it might not be necessarily available in public on the website, but I would contact them and see if they have a listing of those they recommend. So people who attend their conferences, they're trying to maintain a listing, and now they may not, I'm not sure what the vetting process is for them, but I imagine it would be similar to the Alliance. With the Alliance, they have more of a vetting process where if you go to the conferences, you go to a certain number of workshops that address certain issues, then you can obtain the necessary credentials to be on their preferred provider list. So those are some of the options I would look into first. And then if you can't find someone that's close that you can see in person, check with someone to see if they do online counseling. So there's a lot of options as far as therapeutic approaches. What I want to make clear is that safety, or what gets mislabeled as conversion therapy, isn't like a single therapeutic approach. We're all just therapists using mainstream counseling approaches, and the main thing is we're following the client and their goals for therapy. What the client is directing the process with their own goals. We're not imposing goals upon them. We're just using therapeutic approaches we would get from any other counseling program that you would get from any other school of thought, and just applying them to the client's goals.